Hello,
Hello,
I'm Ryan.
I'm Shayla.
Today we'll be doing Unit 1, 3 sections. The first section is 5-3,
Solving quadratic equations by factoring and graphing.
5-4,
Completing the square,
and 5-6.
the quadratic formula. In order to solve quadratic equations by graphing and factoring, you would need to know the definition of zero of a function. It is basically a function that equals zero. So right here we have find zeros by using a graph or table. So the first method that you would use, which is graph the function. And so you can tell if the graph opens upward because a would be bigger than 0. If it's less than 0, then it opens downward like this. But right now for this problem, it opens upward on a graph. The -3 is the y-intercept, so y equals -3. To find the vertex of the function, you need to use -b over 2a, and plugging in the value would lead to -1, which is your x value for the coordinate. To find the y value, you need to plug in the -1, and to solve and simplify this function. And the answer you would get would be -4. Which is your y value. And so the coordinate that you have is -1, -4. Next thing that you do is plug the x values that you choose into the table and put it into the function, and it would come out with the fx values, which is y. And so I'm doing it out of order, but I already did it on the calculator and it got me those answers. After you get your values from the table, you want to graph them. And so the dots on the line means that there are zeros. So the zeros are -3 and +1. One property that you would need to know is the zero product property. This means if the product of two quantities equals 0, at least one of the quantities equals 0. So for example, if there was 6 times 0, it would equal 0. Another way of saying this is if AB equals 0, then A and B equals 0. In order to find zeros by factoring, you would have to set the function equal to 0. And so we are going to use this function. So x squared subtract 8x plus 12 equal to 0. The next step that you would do is factor. So you have to find factors of 12 and that add up to -8 as well. So we are going to do x in parentheses. And the factors that come out from these two are -2 and -6. And this still equals to 0. So after that, what you would do is make it into separate equations, which is x squared equals 0, or you can do the other equation as x minus 6 equals 0. And to solve that, you do +6 plus 6, so x equals 6. And +2 plus 2, x equals +2. So these are your zeros.
From section 5-4, completing the square. To solve quadratic equations, you can take the square root of both sides. Be sure to consider the positive and negative square roots. So you have this, x squared equals 15. Take the square root of both sides. If x squared equals a, and a is not a non-negative real number, then you get x equals plus over minus symbol square root a, which is 15.
If a quadratic expression of the form x squared plus bx cannot model a square, you can add a term to form a perfect square trinomial. This is called completing the square. To complete the square, you would have to use x squared plus bx plus b over 2 to the second power.
Solving quadratic equations ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 by completing the square. First step is to collect the variables on the one side of the equation and constants on the other. As needed, divide both sides by a to make the coefficient of x squared term 1. Complete the square by adding b divided by 2 squared on both sides of the equation. Then factor the variable expressions as a perfect square and take the square root of both sides of the equation and solve for the values of the variable. Section 5-6, the quadratic formula. Set up your equation first. Divide by a. Subtract c divided by a from both sides. You will then need to complete the square, factor it, and take the square roots, which you can do using the discriminant, which is the part of the quadratic formula that you can use to determine the number of real roots in a quadratic equation. After that, you will subtract b divided by 2a from both sides, and then simplify. From section 5.3, write a quadratic function with the zeros, 2 and negative 3. X minus 2 and x plus 3 equals 0. Add them together, you get x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. Set up the equation, add b divided by 2 squared, which is 9, so plus 9 plus and 9. So x squared minus 6x plus 9
equals 25.
X minus 3 squared equals 25. Square root both of them. X minus 3 equals 5 plus 3 both sides. X equals 8.